The president sends a $4 trillion budget to Congress, complete with $320 billion in new taxes. Republicans call it envy economics. This is Special Report. Good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Brett Baer. It's safe to say that on this Groundhog Day, we have way more than 6 additional weeks of battles between Republicans and Democrats to look forward to. Today, as President Obama unveiled his new budget, Republicans saw the shadow of huge tax increases and more spending. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel breaks down the numbers and the politics.
President Obama's $3.9 trillion budget proposal for fiscal year 2016 arrived on Capitol Hill. The president sold the package at the Department of Homeland Security.
We can afford to make these investments while remaining fiscally responsible.
GOP leaders note it never balances, includes a $2.4 trillion spending increase, a $2.1 trillion tax hike, and adds $8.5 trillion to the national debt.
There's so many positive things he could have done instead of phoning in another tired tax and spend manifesto.
Speaker John Boehner blasted the proposal as being more taxes and more spending, saying, quote, "It may be Groundhog Day, but the American people can't afford a repeat of the same old top-down policies of the past." One of the old policies getting a new boost is the so-called death tax. Its rate increased from 40 to nearly 60%, and the states would be double taxed as both capital gains and inheritance. The president also drew this line in the sand on the automatic cuts known as sequestration, which he called mindless austerity.
It would be bad for our security and bad for our growth. I will not accept a budget that severs the vital link between our national security and our economic security.
2 years ago, Mr. Obama suggested the cuts would be catastrophic.
If the sequester is allowed to go forward, thousands of Americans who work in fields like national security, education, or clean energy are likely to be laid off.
A GAO report last year found that only one federal employee in the Justice Department was laid off, and other departments and agencies handled the budget cuts with brief furloughs. New Jersey's Scott Garrett is a senior Republican on the House Budget Committee and says the president should look in the mirror.
Well, remember who was the author of the sequester. That was his idea, right, to do it in the first place. So if it was mindless austerity, well, just consider the source, I guess. But it was not good. It hurt us in the areas where we should not be cutting, and that is in the area of defense and national security.
Maryland's Chris Van Hollen is the top Democrat on the Budget Committee, and he says more money for national defense is one of 2 areas where there could be common ground.
One is in the area of investing in infrastructure. The president has a plan to get rid of some of the tax breaks that encourage American corporations to send jobs and capital overseas, and instead use those funds and savings to invest in jobs and infrastructure here at home.
The Republican chairman of the House Budget Committee agrees infrastructure and national security could be areas of agreement, but says the commander-in-chief must do more.
Number one priority for members of Congress and for the executive branch is to keep America safe. What we call on the president to do is define what the mission is. Tell us what the mission is. Tell us what the strategy is, and we'll fashion a budget to fit that strategy.
Republicans see the president's plan as backward-looking and catering to political interests on the left. It also doesn't seem to reflect the reality of GOP majorities in both the House and the Senate. Brett?
Mike Emanuel live on the Hill. Mike, thank you. Stocks were up today. The Dow gained 196. The S&P 500 finished ahead 26. The Nasdaq brought in 41. President Obama is pushing back on criticism of his policy against ISIS terrorists. Correspondent Kevin Cork tells us the president wants to be seen as taking the high ground in a battle fought with political overtones.
At the Department of Homeland Security, a familiar refrain from President Obama: "Don't play politics with America's safety."
You may have noticed they usually don't agree with me. But don't jeopardize our national security over this disagreement.
The disagreement with GOP lawmakers over extending funding for DHS by month's end. A catch-22 for Democrats on the Hill, forced to choose between backing the president's executive action on immigration or fully funding the agency. The speech, a day after the commander-in-chief offered a full-throated defense of his foreign policy strategy.
If we don't have inside of Iraq or inside of Syria or inside of Afghanistan both the capacity and the will of people to fight for themselves, then any gains that are made eventually dissipate. So this takes longer, but it's the right way to do things.
The president citing incremental and measurable improvement, proclaiming ISIS weakened by drones and air power, al-Qaeda under pressure, and a growing coalition helping to fight terror in and throughout the region, all with fewer American boots on the ground.
The president talked about in the State of the Union address that when he came into office that we had 180,000 troops overseas in Iraq and Afghanistan. We're down now to 15,000 and on a downward trajectory there.
Down at a time when critics say the exact opposite should be happening, with the threats of ISIS, al-Qaeda, and Boko Haram all surging.
And I think that the president has set an ambitious and, I think, under current circumstances, unrealistic goal when he talks about our intent being to destroy ISIS. With the means that he has approved so far, I think that's an unattainable objective.
The president also rejected calls from Republicans to label America's enemy as Islamic terrorists.
I don't quibble with labels. I think we all recognize that this is a particular problem that has roots in Muslim communities. But I think we do ourselves a disservice in this fight if we are not taking into account the fact that the overwhelming majority of Muslims reject this ideology.
Tomorrow, the president hosts a cabinet meeting amid strategic calls for less involvement abroad at a time, frankly, when the world seems to be getting more dangerous by the day. Brett?
Kevin Cork live on the North Lawn. Kevin, thank you. It seems ISIS is not immune to political fighting either. A counterterrorism source says ISIS leaders are trying to regain control of their public message. We're told followers were warned that only 4 accounts are authorized to speak on the group's behalf. The past week has seen a series of miscommunications and conflicting messages from that organization. We learned a few minutes ago that Boston's mayor has postponed the city's parade for the Super Bowl champion Patriots from Tuesday to Wednesday. Much of the Northeast and the Midwest are buried under up to 1.5 feet of snow tonight. Correspondent Garrett Tenney is in Chicago.
This guy's going to push it. This is the kind of snowstorm that can bring you to your knees. Digging out across the Midwest and the plains from a blockbuster winter storm that stretches all the way out to the East Coast. Places like hard-hit Boston and areas of New York still digging out from a brutal blast last week.
That's bad. That's real bad. Especially it's real bad.
Constant snowfall and 40-mile-per-hour winds created whiteout driving conditions across much of the Midwest, including Nebraska, where at least 2 people died in separate traffic accidents. Record-breaking snowfall set new records in Detroit. More than 16 inches makes this the 3rd worst snowstorm in Motor City history. At its heaviest, snow fell at more than an inch an hour in Chicago. The blizzard ranks 5th among monster winter storms. It dumped a heavy white blanket of more than 19 inches.
There was 3 accidents in just like a 5-mile trip.
I mean, I haven't got it stuck on the expressway, but I've definitely slid a few times.
The politics of snow removal are fraught with consequence for those in office. Chicago city leaders in particular know all too well. Shovel the streets quickly and safely or face political heat. Sitting Mayor Rahm Emanuel faces re-election later this month. He's keeping his administration out in front of the storm.
People were able to take public transportation. The main streets were clear. We're now moving on the residential streets, make sure they're also clear, and get that equipment, get everything salted and removed.
The good news is plows are scooping up all that heavy snow in places like Chicago. The bad news is the Midwest and the East are bracing for more, and it's just around the corner. Brett?
Garrett Tenney live in Chicago tonight. Garrett, thank you. Up next, we have a new leader in the Republican presidential race. We'll explain. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 5 in Atlanta, where Interstate 75 and 85 through downtown were closed in both directions for about 3 hours after a suspicious device was found. Police sent a robot in to investigate a PVC pipe duct taped to the concrete wall of a bridge. The situation made Atlanta's already problematic traffic situation even worse. Officials detonated that pipe. The investigation continues. Fox 6 in Milwaukee, and a painful Groundhog Day for the mayor of Sun Prairie, Wisconsin. Jonathan Freund says Jimmy the groundhog whispered to him that spring would come early. Then he took a bite out of the mayor's ear. As if that were not bad enough, Jimmy's handlers say the mayor got it wrong. 6 more weeks of winter, that is. And this is a live look at Austin, Texas from our affiliate out there, Fox 7. The big story there tonight is a declaration of Chris Kyle Day in Texas. Governor Greg Abbott signed the proclamation honoring the former Navy SEAL. The movie about Kyle, American Sniper, has, of course, been a huge hit across the country. Kyle was born and lived in Texas. He was fatally shot at a North Texas gun range 2 years ago. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back.